Hey guys, hey, it's Matthew again, and we are going to be reviewing some of the questions that are associated with quiz 3, okay? And the first question is talking about images. I think this is a really important question. Let's go back to brackets. Here we go. Because I was kind of just trying to find some helpful pieces of information that might help explain some of my answers, but this particular answer can, I think, be carried with just my words. Essentially, a PNG is most often made in Adobe Illustrator. It's a vector-based file, or it's made with vector-based software more often than not. And so a good example of that would be, let's say you're making a logo for a website, and you need the logo for the website to have a transparent background. You also need that logo to be sort of flexible. So when you scale it up or scale it down, the quality will remain pretty darn good. And that's part of the advantage of a vector-based file, which essentially means it's not pixel-based, but the shapes and the colors are based off of mathematical information that the software is processing to produce an image, if that makes sense. So, the primary application that I use to make PNGs is Adobe Illustrator, and Adobe Illustrator is a vector-based platform. If I were to make that logo for a website for a company, I could open up Adobe Illustrator and I could export the logo that I had created as a PNG with a transparent background. And actually, just kind of going back to the example of Dene College, this logo, I'm guessing, look, you can even kind of drag. I wonder, let's do a real quick experiment. I'm going to drag this to my website and see if that works. There it goes. And yes, it is a PNG. Look at that. So hold on a second. Let me minimize some of this other stuff so that we can see. So yeah, DC underscore logo 20-1 and its PNG file. Now, just for fun, I want to, yeah. So if we're looking at this image, like see right here in the thumbnail, it has a white background, but here when we open it in preview, the background is kind of grayed out. Preview is essentially indicating that this logo, there's content here, but in all of these gray areas, it's just transparent. There's no information. And we just dragged this from the website. So it's really interesting. Let's go back and look at the website, but it has blue information back here. Well, that's because the logo is sitting on top of the header banner or the header portion of the website, where HTML and CSS have told the browser to render it this dark blue. Okay. And so the logo is just sitting on top. And it has transparency. It's surrounded by transparency with exception to the actual logo information. I hope that sort of makes sense, but that's a really good circumstance as to why you would want to use a logo. And kind of going back to this example right here, I mean, I literally just pulled this logo from the website. I just dragged it onto the desktop. And here it's surrounded by blue, because the blue is coming from the background. And here, preview is showing that there's nothing surrounding this logo. It's just transparent information as indicated by that sort of like, I guess, generic gray field. Okay. So going back to questions, we've talked about a PNG a bit. PNGs are by far my favorite image formats because I use Adobe Illustrator a lot. The real truth, guys, is I don't use Adobe Photoshop much for anything except for editing photos, like existing photos. So if I do a photo shoot and I'm using images out of my Nikon camera, then yes, I'm very interested in using Photoshop because the files that are coming out of my camera are pixel based. And that's why that's a good software application to use for that process. But if I'm interested in creating a PNG with real, and this Dene College logo, I mean, it looks really nice and clean and clear to me. I don't see any pixelation. I don't see any distortion. PNGs are very clean, nice, efficient files, perfect for web design. Okay, I love PNGs. JPEGs are okay, but they're pixelated. Okay, I mean, you just have to know that. And it's okay, you can still print a JPEG, and you could even still use a JPEG on a website. In fact, I'm betting that maybe this banner image is a JPEG. Or maybe it was created using InDesign, which has some vector graphics in combination with pixel graphics. So going back to the question, a JPEG is pixel based. A GIF, the real truth is, guys, I can't remember the last time I intentionally exported a GIF out of any of my Adobe applications. I think they're a bit dated, although a GIF has the potential to be animated. So for example, there are automated GIF animators online where you can take, like, for example, you could take an image of your hand kind of opening and closing, and maybe take 4 or 5 different still shot images of that process. You could load them into a GIF animator, and then it would produce an animation to put on social media, for example. And GIFs are, in my opinion, they're a little bit dated. And I don't use GIFs at all. I can't imagine a circumstance where I would create one, but they're just good to know. They're good to know because, frankly, they're good to avoid. Why use a GIF when there's a PNG that can be exported or found? But that's just me. Okay. The second question, can an image be made clickable with an associated URL link? The answer is absolutely yes. That is very handy in this day and age because, as you know, folks are navigating websites on their iPad or their iPhone. And it's almost sort of become second nature for the user to want to use their index finger and sort of click on an image to go to the next page or to go somewhere or to do something. And so you can Google that question and you will find a lot of solutions online. Okay, so you can combine the JPEG or image tag with an href, like what they're suggesting here. So the image source with an href. There are many, many circumstances. In fact, I mean, that's the code right there. It's very, very simple. You have an opening, a tag, a href tag, and then there's the location as far as where the link will take you. And then, of course, there's the image source information because you have to be able to point to the image so that it will load up in the browser. And then you close out the A tag here. So the opening and the closing. Okay. Yeah. It's really interesting too, because look, here's the opening for image. And the particular closing is just this little mark right there. Okay. So yeah, that's very, very handy and good to practice, especially with this new project. The third question, what does 72 DPI mean and why is it important to understand regarding web design? Well, everything is 72 DPI on a screen. And so, you know, you've probably heard me say this before, maybe in a different class, but 300 DPI is minimum for print professional quality. So if you're printing a photograph for a client, or if you're printing something, or maybe you're sending a client something finalized for print, you're not going to send them 72 DPI. Maybe you'll send them a 72 DPI draft or 150 DPI draft, because you don't want to give them the 300 DPI until you get paid, honestly. Let's be honest. So, but 72 DPI is standard for web screens. So if you're doing web design, 72 DPI is a very magical number. And so when you're using Photoshop or when you're using Adobe Illustrator, you can go to File and then Save for Web, and you can export a JPEG or a PNG. Either one can be exported at 72 DPI, and either one can be exported at 300 or higher DPI. Some folks, even export things at 600 DPI, but that's getting a little bit crazy. The reason why you also like 72 DPI on a computer screen is because you don't want the file sizes to be too large. If the JPEG or image file size is too large, that essentially means that the computer has to make that request to the server up in the cloud to download that large 300 DPI image and bring it to your machine so that you can see it. Alternatively, you can have your computer make the request for a 72 DPI image that needs to be downloaded or brought to your machine so that you can see it. So imagine like just there's an issue of speed, so you've probably sometimes been on a website and you had to wait a little while for an image to show up. Even sometimes 72 DPI images can be large or too large rather. But I definitely would never put like a 300 DPI image on a website. That's crazy. Okay. Trust me. Okay. So the next question, when would be a good circumstance to use an image with a transparent background? Well, we talked about that a little bit when we were discussing the Dene College logo. And we dragged it over and we investigated and looked at it a lot. And so that's pretty much what that question is getting at there, okay? And it's kind of funny, it's a little bit clever because I'm just saying to use an image. Again, you cannot make a JPEG image with a transparent background. That is impossible, okay? JPEGs just don't do that, but PNGs do. Describe figure, caption, and HTML5. Well, HTML has been around for a long time. And I actually found this, I Googled this before just to kind of, provide a little bit of visual context. But yeah, HTML has been around for quite a long time. I don't have the exact year off the top of my head. I just use it. It's a fantastic tool. But yes, I mean, even when I was a young lad, HTML was floating around and folks were creating these really cool websites, like DIY, just to kind of express themselves and who they were. The whole web environment has changed quite a bit, but HTML is still around. And HTML does go through these evolutions or growths. And currently, I believe we're at HTML5. And so the image tag is really, really handy, but with HTML5, you can wrap images with this thing called figure caption. It's important to be aware of HTML5 and the most up-to-date way to structure things on a website, because Google and Bing, they have these spiders crawling your websites. And when your website is sort of in good operational order, like for example, when it's organized well, that essentially can do well for your SEO or search engine optimization, which we haven't talked about much yet. We're not even close to talking about that. But that's why using things like Fig Caption and HTML5 and being aware of the advancements of HTML is very, very important, okay? And so down here, there's also a great resource that I want to point you guys to. It's called W3 Schools. And so if you're ever wondering, well, how do I do this? Well, this is a fantastic resource where they give you the code. They give you a lot of really great things to sort of experiment with. And in all honesty, copy and paste into your projects. Okay, so this is right here is an excellent example of how Fig Caption and Figure is being used in combination to render a photo. with this additional attribute information. I believe we did talk about attributes in the previous project. I can't remember now, but the image tag has these attributes. For example, one attribute is, okay, well, where is the file? Point me to it so I can render it. That's what the browser is asking. But in addition, there are some other attributes that can be associated with an image. For example, making a website ADA compliant. And so if someone is unable to see an image, sometimes the browser will actually use these alt tags or alt attributes, or I'm not speaking clearly, this particular attribute with the alt, I guess, verbiage, to talk to the person who is unable to see the screen, okay? And then you can also add styles. We haven't talked about CSS or styling yet, but you actually can have inline styling associated with HTML. It's not the best practice to do things that way, but hey, okay. So yeah, I mean, if you want to know more about Fig and Fig Caption, then you can Google the question, and then I would suggest that you go to W3 Schools, because this is just something that you should always have ready to go, because it's a fantastic resource in this class, and it's free. Describe basic table structure. Okay, so I'm going to go to brackets, and I did, like with the example that I give you guys, I'm showing you guys, if I'm not mistaken, how to use an image tag with the source attribute and the alt attribute to create a simple to render an image. Okay. Furthermore, there's some basic table structure. So here's the table in the intro tag, and here's the table outro tag. And then there are some, that's basically saying, hey, I'm about to start a table. And then there's the TR tag, okay, which stands for table row. And then there's the TD tag, which stands for the table data, all right? And so, I mean, those three, the table, TR, and TD, those are the, bread and butter tags associated with creating a table in HTML. And so let's say, for example, you're creating a table for your course or school schedule. You could maybe try that in your project example, or better yet, maybe you could create a table that's associated with your experience using Adobe software, whether that's Photoshop, InDesign, or Illustrator. And of course, you could add web experience now, using HTML, and in the future, very, very soon, CSS. Describe, okay, well, let's go to question 7 here. Describe spanning and how it can be used in your table design process. Well, instead of talking about it, I almost kind of thought it would be easier to show you. So notice how, like, there are this table title, like these two cells are sort of combined. That's spanning, okay? And so yeah, that's the best way I can really describe it, in my opinion, is just to simply show you what spanning means when you're creating a table. You can combine cells, and take a look at the code in the textbook for details. I rarely have to do that, but I don't know, give it a shot. It's fun. Okay. In what circumstance would you use a long table? And the real truth is, guys, I've never in my life used a long table. Although when I was working on the ENMU website quite a few years ago, we had an interesting problem, because ENMU had many, many degree programs, and we created this really complicated table that just like seemed to scroll forever. And I don't even believe that we used long table formatting in that circumstance, but essentially I did go to the textbook on page 136, and I just wanted to read what it says about the long table, okay? Okay, so here we go. Part of the reason for having separate T head and T foot and those are tags. Elements is so that if you have a table that is taller than the screen, or if printed longer than one page, then the browser can keep the header and footer visible whilst the contents of the table scroll. This is intended to make it easier for users to see which column the data is in. However, this functionality is not implemented by default in any current browser. I think that this is, I mean, long table business seems like overkill to me, but now it might be helpful to answer this quiz question. And by the way, that text again, I just read off of page 136 in the Duckett book, okay? We talked about what elements create a table cell in a sense. So going back to the code, remember, this is the code that just says, hey, making a table here, pay attention to the browser. And then the elements that make up a cell are essentially, I mean, there's the table row, and in a very kind of corresponding manner, there's the table data, right? And then there's the data itself. So the table data is holding the data itself. The table row is, and the TR and TD is creating the formatting of the table, but the data actually lives here, okay? The information actually lives there, I should say it that way. Why is the book showing you sections called old code, non-HTML? Well, you know, browsers will, they're remarkably flexible, okay? Browsers will render old ways of rendering, of showing HTML or creating it on the screen, but it will also, more often than not, operate with the newer or more evolved versions of HTML, such as HTML5. And so a good version of a good example of this is, remember, I think in the last or one of the previous quizzes, we were talking about the difference between the tags bold and strong. They basically kind of do the same thing, except bold is like the old code way, and strong is the more updated way to do it, okay? But both will work if you're doing if you're going to test this out using, you know, Google Chrome. Okay, so I think that's enough for quiz 3. Good luck, guys. I hope you're enjoying this, because again, you know, HTML is it's a very simple thing to do, but I also believe that you know, it's a very marketable skill and can open some doors professionally and personally, and it's also just a lot of fun because, of course, I think it's fantastic to be able to tell a computer to do something and then the computer complies. Or better yet, isn't it amazing to put code on an HTML file up on the server, and then someone on the other side of the planet can actually access that information through a website? That is really, I know it sounds really kind of basic, but to me, it's still magical. Have a good day, guys. Bye-bye.